To discuss land-based innovations, here's co-chair of Solutions from the Land and former California Secretary of Agriculture, A.G. Kawamura, Ohio coordinator of the Alliance for the Great Lakes and former manager of Ohio City Farm, Destiny Henton, founder and CEO of Dreaming Out Loud, Chris Bradshaw, and panel moderator, Deborah Atwood.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. I hope you are going to stay awake for the rest of the afternoon because I have very interesting panelists here today. And before we get started, I want to set the stage about who these individuals are. They come from 3 different parts of the country. They are working in 3 different scales of size of operations and type of operations. And interestingly enough, we have AG, who's in a situation where it's gone from very rural to very urban over the course of his family's lifetime of farming in Orange County. Destiny was very young and in college and part of the beginnings of Ohio Farms, correct? You were part of that whole enterprise being set up.
Jumped on.
She jumped on it, okay. Yeah. And Chris was the innovator here in DC in a very difficult set of circumstances in Ward 7. We're going to hear from all 3 of these individuals about where they started, the first few steps that it took to get to where they are now, and describe some of the innovations that they have been able to put together and are going to share with us today. So let me start with AG.
Okay, thanks, Deb, and thanks to Kathleen and George Washington University, as well as Sabine. I don't know if you're here for University at the District of Columbia, and of course to Agree for having us here today. I'm a third-generation farmer out of Southern California, Orange County, which is just south of LA County. When I was born, I'm now suddenly 1 year older than the average age of the average American farmer. I'm just turned 60. And Orange County was one of the top 10 agricultural counties in America at that time. We had tremendous amount of citrus and a lot of other production. And what you started to see was this enormous wave of migration coming out of LA County down into Southern California and into our county. And in the course of my lifetime, we went from being an extraordinarily rural county where you could drive for miles in citrus groves or see all kinds of agriculture, from livestock to every kind of fruit and vegetable that you might imagine, including strawberries, which is one of the crops I grow. But in fact, there's one of our cities nearby was the lima bean capital of the world. But in the course of that 50, 60 years, there's just been such tremendous urbanization that we found ourselves slowly trying to adjust to farming with a lot of neighbors suddenly. And it was about 30 years ago, I know this, my daughter's 31, was about the last time we farmed on property that we own as a family. We started a model where we were leasing our property. We were maintaining a pretty large base of agriculture, somewhere between 600 to 1,000 acres regularly over the last 40 years is what we were farming on. And at the time we were growing vegetables from celery, green beans is a crop we still grow, but the onslaught of urbanization kept on forcing us to learn how to farm in different places, on different pieces of ground. We ended up being like land managers, if you will, and for this model of what urban agriculture is all about, I will basically be describing a different kind of model, but one that certainly exists, whether it's in the United States or anywhere else on the planet. If you want to use the word edible landscaping, that's kind of defines some of what we're doing in our arena. We farm on private property, we farm under the utility wires on utility company property. We farm on military property. We farm on Department of Education property when we can find it. It's always kind of the going observation that if it's a vacant lot, and for us, a vacant lot can be a 3-acre, 2-acre, 4-acre lot. That's big enough for us to take a good hard look at it. And the rule of thumb is always, well, if the weeds are growing and they look great, it's a pretty good piece of ground generally. And what we'll do is then ask who owns it, and you always look for a water source because, of course, in Southern California, and we are in year 5 of our drought, heading into year 6 here, water is really important. We may have a chance to talk about scarce resources, but you look for property, then you look for water, and if you can find both of those and you find a willing landlord, that seems to be the model. And currently we're farming in several strange places. The traditional ones underneath the wires, electrical wires, where there's more of a permanent easement where agriculture can last for a while. We're farming on a military base, and just recently we had a chance to farm on an abandoned airport that was part of a abandoned military base that was handed back to the county. And so we're actually farming in between runways on this airport. On this military base, there was an abandoned golf course, some of the greatest ground I've ever had a chance to farm on. And we're farming on an old golf course. We've transformed the golf course into a farm. So I think our model then, it's replicable, it's scalable, it's hard, and we'll talk about that later, but it's something that we do. And we sell at a scale where we're big enough. I was mentioned earlier, you have to have different kinds of scales depending on what you're growing. So we farm where we have enough. I grow a lot of green beans, believe it or not, hand-picked green beans, as well as some strawberries and some cabbage, but we also grow smaller amounts of things like bell peppers or different squashes, and depending on what your quantity is what you end up selling. So it's a model that we're constantly pushing the envelope on what we can grow, looking for marketplaces and customers, from restaurants to chain stores.
Great, thank you, AG. Destiny.
Yep. So for me, I've been in the game a little less time. So for the past year, I've been working in the real world in Cleveland. And what's been really interesting as far as traveling around to see different family around the U.S., what I've always continued to hear, and even yesterday my Uber driver told me, oh, Cleveland, it's so much going on in Cleveland, so much going on. And when I'm thinking about that and continue to hear that great things are going on in Cleveland, one thing for me is what exactly, where are those great things happening? And one of those places is actually Ohio City, which is where the farm is. And that area is really interesting. It's a 25-block area, but over the past 8 years, it went from the main corridor in Ohio City, which is West 25th Street, went from about 40% vacancy to under 2% vacancy. And so with that type of development, you can only imagine the different dynamics that were changing in an area that were more African-American people were living there. And so in that area now, there's about 14% Latino people. There's about 40% African-American people. And when we look at Cleveland, is about a third of its people are in poverty, and 3 percentage points higher, even still today, you'll see Ohio City is actually 3 percentage points higher in regards to poverty. And so when we think about looking at Ohio City, in this particular area that is seeing investment, there are 2 public housing properties there. One is Lakeview, which is home to over 1,000 different people living right in Ohio City, and Riverview is another property with over 644 units. And right behind Riverview Tower, which is really interesting, Riverview Tower sits on that main corridor, West 25th, which is where all that development happened, but Riverview Tower stayed there right next to all of the development. And behind it, previously, there were public housing estates for families. There were low-rise estates right behind the senior housing. And behind the low-rise estates were Cuyahoga River, and on the other side of the Cuyahoga River is downtown Cleveland. So this area is literally one of the most beautiful spots in Cleveland. In 2001, that area was actually the low-rise estates behind Riverview Tower. The public housing was torn down to build mixed-income housing. But what they found out was that the area was actually eroding down into the Cuyahoga River. And so no development is possible ever on that property. So in 2010, conversations began around what could possibly happen with that space. And so when you look at Cleveland, 56% of Cleveland is actually a food desert. And then even going further, the Cleveland is part of Cuyahoga County, and in Cuyahoga County, 1 in 6 adults are food insecure and 1 in 5 children are food insecure. So one of the conversations that sparked was looking at urban agriculture, and that's where the idea for the Ohio City Farm came about. So there was a collaboration which is really innovative in its way that a lot of people from the neighborhood, as far as Ohio City Incorporated, which is a community development corporation in the neighborhood, Great Lakes Brewery Company, some of you may drink the beer from there. They're actually based in Ohio City, right next door basically to the farm. They came together, and also the Refugee Response Group is a place where refugees from all across the world come to help them get assimilated with Northeast Ohio. And so in this effort, these groups came together with the city council and the city and decided to put a farm there. And today on that land is the Ohio City Farm, which is 6 acres, and which is known as one of the largest urban contiguous farms in the country. And it's been an amazing journey. You'll see the CSAs and SNAP benefits and so many other programs going out of the Ohio City Farm. And it literally being right behind the public housing estates where 644 units are home to so many amazing individuals in the community. The Refugee Response Group has one of the biggest plots on that land, and they actually they have the people that come on, the refugees actually get to harvest the different harvests that are particular to their country. So red onions and sweet potatoes that they know how to grow, they get to grow right there on the Ohio City Farm. And there's another program, the CMHA Green Team, which is residents from the public housing property right there on the land coming and getting to harvest the land and learn how to farm, and also giving some farm tours as well. And it's a really interesting program because it's definitely getting the people that live on the farm to be interacting with it as well. And a few different tenants have left the farm, but it's really just an amazing collaboration of community in its essence. And the farm stand is actually a part of the farmers market on the farm. So there are people from the community that come to the farm stand on Fridays and Saturdays that are greeted by a resident of CMHA, which is the public housing. And she's amazing because she not only is able to connect and be a familiar face to the community, but also she's a familiar face within the public housing. So in that way, they're creating different connections because there's so many barriers when we think about urban agriculture and farmers markets for communities of color as well. But one of the challenges I would say we face is when I referenced earlier Lakeview Estates. So Lakeview is actually down on West 25th as well, but it's just down the street. So literally you can see downtown Cleveland from Lakeview. It's a bridge away, literally. But getting to that farm, getting to the Ohio City Farm, or even the West Side Market, which is a 100-year-old, one of the biggest markets in the country, is very difficult. They don't have sidewalks, and there's actually a highway that separates that public housing from the rest of the community. Literally, they're isolated. There's one way in. Well, there's 2 ways in. But it's still the same idea, and it's really sad. There are no sidewalks. There's a highway that lets people off right there. So getting to any grocery store in Ohio City or the Ohio City Farm is not exactly your everyday mission. So I think that's a huge challenge that we face with the Ohio City Farm. And also, just when we think of capacity, I was tasked with a lot for the farm, and it was very difficult because being new to the urban agricultural scene, and also the people that were working the land, they were trying to help me, and I'm trying to help them. It was just so much, and we definitely needed more capacity. And also, as far as outreach, we had to be very particular in trying to reach out to communities of color, but in that, it takes a lot more people and a lot more intentionality as far as how are we doing outreach and getting people to farmers markets in Ohio City. So it's a really amazing place, but I think there are a lot of challenges that the Ohio City Farm is facing that a lot of other farmers markets and urban farms are facing as well. And in my work, I was trying to make sure that we were extending a hand to communities of colors and vulnerable populations to the farm and just into those conversations, because I think there's so many people that are passionate, like the person that works at our farm stand that's from the public housing. And there's people like that in all of our communities, but we definitely have to be intentional about extending the hand to get them to the table to put that knowledge into the conversation.
Well, thank you, Destiny. She is very excited about the work she's encountered, and she's going to carry it forward, and we'll get into that. But in terms of innovation, just finding pieces of property to farm on, or finding land that nothing could be done with it because it was eroding away, and creating this community of interconnected cultures and growing something and sharing. And yes, we're going to get into the challenges as well here, but I think just the innovation of what the two of you have explained, I think is really important. So Chris, I'm going to turn it to you.
All right. Thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. Yeah, Dreaming Out Loud, our mission is to create economic opportunity within marginalized communities through building a healthy, equitable food system. Really, we are rebuilding community-based food systems in the urban environment, both spiritually, communally, and infrastructurally. We, obviously, by the name Dreaming Out Loud, don't really have a history originally rooted in food, although our values were always kind of rooted in soil. I've always seen agriculture as a way to connect with people, and that's one thing that we have to first base our work on. It's building out the community relationships within a particular area so that that particular farm or innovation actually means something to someone, but also then connecting the skills so that they can make use of it, as well as the infrastructure so that it functions within a viable economic environment and a viable agricultural environment. When I start thinking about values rooted in soil, and we're talking about land-based innovations, I think about the first initiatives that we had entering the food system. Currently, we run 2 farmers markets. One is in Southwest DC, and Southwest is interesting because if you go down there, there's a $2 billion development by P. and Hoffman at the Wharf. There's $2,000-3,000 a month condos and apartments, but also there is a cluster of public housing communities, James Creek, Syfax Gardens, and you see all the hallmarks you think of when people are impacted by a lack of economic opportunity and healthy food access. And one day we were working to start the farmer's market, and I was putting down a yard sign, and I had just turned the corner, and this little boy, about 10 years old, apparently didn't have anything to do on a Saturday morning, and I heard this sound like someone was beating the sign with a stick. And I came back around the corner, and sure enough, that's what was happening. He was with a couple of friends, and I approached him gently at first because I didn't want him to run away or think that I was there to get him in trouble or police him. So I said, well, why don't you use your energy in a little bit different way? Stop hitting my sign. Come back and see me next week at 9 o'clock Saturday morning. We're starting a farmer's market. And his friends laughed. They thought he was in trouble, that was a punishment. But the next week at 8:15 in the morning, they were there waiting on us before we even got there. Oh, wow. And so, those 3 became 5, became 7, became 10, became unmanageable. Trying to manage a farmer's market that was just starting with just a few farmers from Westmoreland County, formerly seasonal and migrant workers, who took a chance on us to come up to DC communities that don't have equal access. And we actually grew with them as they progressed through life, got them in the Summer Youth Employment Program. We eventually got space at a really cool arts and event space called Blind Wino, where we began to grow food down there, incorporate more folks in the community as well as the youth into the space. But as we began to think what growing and scaling more opportunities looked like, we got involved in advocacy and public policy, and something called the Urban Farm and Food Security Act passed, which opened up more DC land for urban farming. Since then, we identified a 2-acre piece of property behind Kelly Miller Middle School in Ward 7, which is very, very near to Lincoln Heights, which is the largest public housing community in DC, also very near to Clay Terrace and Richardson dwellings. And so when we start to think about what needs to happen in terms of survivability and sustainability in urban agriculture, it's really a model where it's not just based on growing and selling vegetables. So we're looking at commercial kitchen space and cold storage and shipping containers so we can provide some of the supports for entrepreneurs, and also do some aggregation and distribution so that those what we grow and what also comes from our other farm partners can reach communities that don't have equal access. I think some of our next steps are going to be looking at abandoned schools and other types of places that have infrastructure where you don't have to invest as heavily. But overall, I think the food system and discussing land, there's a lot of directions you can go. We look at race, class, and gender as some of the lenses through which we see food, but there's also power relationships in the use of land. And in the city, we have a lot of developer pressure on every conceivable inch of ground in the city. Everything needs to be a condo that no one can afford. Well, apparently someone can afford, but the problem is it displaces communities through the economic violence of gentrification. So when you're talking about Lincoln Heights, which sits on a plain, or actually a hill, that overlooks the entirety of the city, you can see the Capitol building, you can see the brand new African American History and Culture Museum, but that 95% African American community is a target for displacement. The city enters into these agreements that are sometimes looked at as public-private partnerships, but oftentimes they're transfers of wealth to those who are already landed and already resourced. So we look at the use of land and land use in urban agriculture is also an opportunity to stage a fight for a community's right to exist.
Great, thank you. So let me just ask a couple of questions before I turn it over to the rest of you. AG, you're talking about land use issues, some challenges there, regulations, taxation kinds of issues, access issues to opportunities. Can you speak to what's working and what's not working from your perspective? And I think we got a taste of it here. But
real quickly, I love, Chris, you mentioned what a great spot an abandoned school would be for an operation for an urban farm, because you have all the parking, you've got sewers, you've got water, you've got usually a vacant lot that might be a really great spot to grow things. So that's a perfect example of trying to make it work. We found that if the zoning's not right, one of the toughest things is trying to get zoning to farm in an urban area. A lot of times the city won't allow agriculture. We found out 17 years ago, we founded we call it the Incredible Edible Park. We were turned down to create a park where we could grow food for the food bank. They said, no, we can't zone this place for agriculture. It was a strip along the railroad tracks. We came back about 2 months later and had a new plan for them. We said, we'd like to build an edible landscape. It's a park. What do you think? And they said, okay. And just like that, the door opened, and 17 years now, there's been this wonderful mini farm, if you will, about a 7-acre farm, 6 to 7 acre farm along the railroad tracks, custom growing food for the food bank. The regulatory arena is really tough for everybody. Businesses in California especially, we seem to be loading up on rules and regs that have good intentions but make it tough to stay in business. I'll get my violin out, but I'll put it away. How tough it is when suddenly you're being asked not to use, for example, we farm both organic, certified organic and conventional, but we have a city that just recently put in a rule that said on city property, we're not going to allow you to use conventional insecticides or herbicides or fungicides until you've tried your organics first, and if they don't work, then you can move forward. This was mostly to try and deal with parks and grass strips. But it was an immediate impact on the ag community in the area, and that continues to go on, this dialogue that needs to happen with what does agriculture need, whether you're big or small, whether you're organic or conventional. The rules, if they don't make it easier for you, food safety rules are enormously difficult these days, and the bigger you get, the more immediately these become part of the overhead, if you will, of running a business, whether it's overhead or overtime for your employees, whether it's paying and making sure your insurance is correct. These are all challenges. Where we can get some help maybe is through both city councils, county supervisors, and you're seeing some great of the food policy councils all over the country are starting to really put into place some good rules that help make it easier, and I think you can make a long list. I think this group here already has started to work on a list like that.
Yeah, great, thank you. And in terms of spreading the word, spreading the gospel in the District of Columbia, are you working in other wards? And if so, how are you doing that? Do we have a food policy council here in the city that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we work in both Ward 6 and 7 and have some thoughts towards Ward 8, but moreover, I mean, there are a lot of great organizations and a lot of great collaborations, Soilful City, the Green Scheme, Zenful Bites, amazing organizations in this DC food movement who are partnering, collaborating, the agroecology network. Those things are happening on the ground, but those are often less visible, but no less powerful. I think that the Food Policy Council, which I'm fortunate to be a member of, will also be able to play a great role in terms of removing barriers for new farmers, new innovations. I'm co-chairing the Urban Ag and Food System Education Working Group. So, I mean, there's lots of great innovations that could happen on rooftops or infrastructure supports for farmers that really need to take the next steps for things to grow. But grow what for whom is the question.
Yeah, no, that's, yeah, connecting farmers to markets and farmers, yeah, to the markets, whatever they're, you know, whatever, whomever they may be. So Destiny, before we turn it over, we're going to have just a short answer about what are you going to do in your new life from lessons learned here.
Oh, definitely. So I think for me, it's been a really interesting journey. So over the past year, getting to learn about the Ohio City Farm has definitely introduced me a lot more, and as I look at social justice and something that's embedded in me and as a passion for moving forward through whatever I do, looking at sustainability as a means for social justice is new to me. And it's, I don't know about everyone else, but definitely how to be more sustainable individually is something new. So moving forward, I see myself in the environmental scene, which is somewhere, if you would have told me 2 years ago, I never would have known. And that's a lot in part of what I knew when I was growing up. So I'm really excited to move forward and think about living differently myself and how that can be taking ownership of our communities, definitely in Cleveland and everywhere else.
Great, thank you so much. So let's turn it over to our audience here. Oh God, we have a lot of questions. Some of them are technical. Let me ask the farmers here, how does soil health come into play when thinking about urban land and growing in the urban land environment?
Can I make a just quick observation on
sure.
that? It's really hard. If you don't own the ground that you're farming on and you know it's destined for development, you're in a tough spot because then you're there hopefully as an asset to the landlord who has plans in the future, and you have to be then willing to step away and move. How much you'll invest in getting that ground just right, getting that soil right, is a function of how long is your lease. If it's a crop-to-crop lease, then you start to look for other ways to at least get your project moving forward. If you get a long lease, 25 years, 10 years, now you can really invest in soil tilth and soil health and restore that the biology in the soil. So it really is a function of what kind of land tenure do you have.
Great.
Yes.
You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'd say in the urban environment, of course, you know, you can have many challenges, whether this is pollution or a building that used to be there, so you're digging around rebar and concrete. But I mean, we were fortunate enough to find a large piece of property that was formerly undeveloped. I don't know how that really happened, divine intervention. But I think soil health can actually be remediated pretty quickly in the urban environment. You're dealing with smaller pieces of property usually. Also through composting and other things, you can get going pretty quickly, and there's lots of compostable materials. So you can nurse soil health back very quickly in the urban environment.
Excellent. I think, can we do one more question? Yeah, one more question. Urban agriculture, urban ag can have many environmental benefits, but just as with rural agriculture, it depends on how the land is farmed. What practices increase ecosystem benefits from urban ag? How can they be incentivized? For instance, stormwater, water, quantity and quality.
Well, go ahead.
In Cleveland, we have the rain barrel program, and although it has, when you get a rain barrel through the city of Cleveland, then you're actually able to get some different discounts on your sewage bill. So that's one small program. But thinking about the Ohio City Farm, the practices are amazing, but it's a different beast when the Ohio City Farm, because that land cannot be developed, and if it weren't, it is the prime location for major real estate. So fortunately, it's not going to change. And there's so much buy-in in Cleveland that the practices there make it look amazing because there's people constantly coming to see the Ohio City Farm from all over the world.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you. We need to wrap this up, but big applause for these individuals who are working the land. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.